The night crept past on slow, black feet. The hour of the bat gave way to the hour of the eel, the hour of the eel to the hour of ghosts. The prince lay abed, staring at his ceiling, dreaming without sleeping, remembering, imagining, twisting beneath his linen coverlet, his mind feverish with thoughts of fire and blood. Finally despairing of rest, Quentyn Martell made his way to his solar, where he poured himself a cup of wine and drank it in the dark. The taste was sweet solace on his tongue, so he lit a candle and poured himself another. Wine will help me sleep, he told himself, but he knew that was a lie. He stared at the candle for a long time, then put down his cup and held his palm above the flame. It took every bit of will he had to lower it until the fire touched his flesh, and when it did, he snatched his hand back with a cry of pain. "Quentyn, are you mad?" "No, just scared. I do not want to burn." When Prince Quentyn Martell accepted his father's mission to travel to Meereen, he knew the journey would be difficult. He was warned it would be dangerous, but nothing could have prepared him for all the hardships and horrors he would face on the road ahead. Finding passage to Meereen caused a knot of problems for Quentyn and his companions, but never could he have imagined so many of his friends would die before they reached their final destination, nor could he have expected or wished to see that he would arrive too late and Daenerys Targaryen would already be betrothed to another. Having failed to steal the heart of the Dragon Queen, Quentyn decided to steal one of her dragons instead. This would prove to be fatal as Quentyn was burned alive in the attempt. In a strange way, he got exactly what he came for: fire and blood. Still, some readers have come to doubt what was described to have happened that night in the Meereenese dragon pit. Though it was said Quentyn was fatally burned by a dragon, skeptics reply with a simple statement: burned bones prove nothing. There's just one thing that seems to be overlooked. What was recovered from the dragon pit after Quentyn's failed plan wasn't a pile of burnt bones. It was a body, a living body, one that was severely burned but still capable of communication. So why do people insist on making the comparison? Why do people insist Quentyn is alive? This story, as brief as it was never meant to be a mystery. This story was never meant to end in chaos and confusion. This was simply meant to be the story of a grand adventure, an adventure designed by the mind of George R.R. Martin. This was yet another story of a young knight in search of glory who found only grief instead. This is the needless death of Quentyn Martell. To discuss Quentyn Martell and the conspiracy surrounding his supposed survival, it would not be enough to just analyze the chapter that covers his tragic demise. If you only look to the Dragontamer chapter for clues to support the theory, you're only working with the ending of Quentyn's story, and that's only a small portion of his sad tale. To discuss Quentyn's sudden and nasty end, we must needs go over all of the groundwork George Martin has laid out from the beginning of his story. We even have to look beyond to before Quentyn's beginning, because his death is part of the larger story Martin is telling of House Martell's role in this Game of Thrones. Quentyn Martell was born in Dorne, the eldest son of Doran Martell and Malario of Norvos. He was the second born of their 3 children. Because of an incident involving his uncle, Oberyn, and a previous lord of House Ironwood, Quentyn was sent to be fostered with the Ironwoods. This made him both their ward and hostage. His mother Malario was horrified at this, as fostering was not a custom in her home of Norvos. But her husband told her it was the only way of repaying the blood debt Oberyn had accrued. Very early, as we see, Quentyn was sent off by his father to settle potentially dangerous political matters. His father Doran was also the Prince of Dorne, a subtle and deliberate man, a man that weighs the consequence of every action. Ever since the rape and murder of his sister Elia and the murder of her 2 children, he has remained ensconced in Dorne, waiting, idle, or so it appears to his friends and foes alike. Doran hasn't just been waiting, he's been secretly working towards a greater goal, plotting long-term to bring down his enemies. Some believe that Quentyn Martell is working towards Royanish restoration, but this suggests that Doran has lost something that Doran is trying to recover. But as we know, Doran was never conquered in the Targaryen conquest. They peacefully integrated into the 7 kingdoms, unbowed, unbent, unbroken. Quentyn Martell is not working towards Royanish restoration because Doran has not lost any rights, privileges, or land that must needs be returned. If Doran wants to spread Royanish laws and customs across Westeros, even towards a greater good, that would be imperialism, not restoration. A much more selfish ambition, and Doran is not a selfish individual. What he has been working towards all these years is vengeance, justice, fire, and blood. He and his late brother Oberyn have conspired in bringing about the downfall of Tywin Lannister for his part in the murder of their family. But it is not enough for Doran just to call the banners in rebellion. That would be a petty act of revenge, one that would lead to war and woe for not just Doran, but for so many innocents across Westeros. And again, Quentyn Martell is not a selfish individual. To achieve his heart's desire, to pay back Tywin in blood, he would once again make use of his son Quentyn. 19-year-old Quentyn Martell is introduced in A Dance with Dragons, a new player in the great game, but no stranger to its rules. He is described as short-legged and stocky, thickly built, with a plain face, brown hair, brown eyes, and stubble on his cheeks. He has a high forehead, broad nose, and square jaw. Smiles do not come easily to Quentyn. So we have a very detailed description of Quentyn. It would be very hard to confuse him for someone else, even in the worst circumstances. Sometime between A Storm of Swords and A Feast for Crows, Doran met with Quentyn in secret. Quentyn was then given a task of great enormity. He must travel to Essos to the slave city of Meereen. There, he would treat with the city's ruler, Queen Daenerys Targaryen. You see, many years ago, a marriage pact was signed in Braavos that promised his sister Princess Arianne would wed Prince Viserys, Dany's brother. However, with Viserys now dead, Quentyn Martell had hoped that Daenerys would honor the marriage pact in his place and wed Quentyn instead. Daenerys has an army of Unsullied, a great following of freedmen, and her most prized assets, 3 growing dragons. Dorne wants to challenge the Lannisters and by extension the Iron Throne, but Dorne is not powerful enough to do so alone. With Daenerys and her hosts, they may have a chance. The risk is that if Dorne's plotting and scheming is discovered prematurely, it would be game over for him, his children, and Dorne. Quote, "Dorne will bleed if your purpose is discovered," his father had warned him as they watched the children frolic in the pools and fountains of the water gardens. "What we do is treason. Make no mistake. Trust only your companions and do your best to avoid attracting notice." End quote. The stranger has paid House Martell many visits in these last generations. Elia and her children are dead, killed at the end of Robert's rebellion. In the same year, in the same war, Prince Lewin Martell, once of the King's Guard, was killed as well. Most recently, Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne, was killed during trial by combat in King's Landing. Doran sent his brother south with specific orders. Oberyn overstepped himself and was killed when his desire for justice became a lust for vengeance. Oberyn deviated from their plan and died. You will see as we go on, death will upset Doran's plans many times, causing each new scheme in his game to fall and burst apart like the blood oranges growing around the water gardens, which means the odds of survival are not in Quentyn's favor. That does not mean I think Doran sent Quentyn on a mission he knew would fail. Doran obviously wants to bring down the Lannisters, which means he wants Quentyn to succeed. If Doran wanted Quentyn dead, there are other, less convoluted ways he could have accomplished that. Quentyn succeeding means dragons for Dorne, but the road to Daenerys is fraught with danger. The political situation in Slaver's Bay is now perilous due to Daenerys ending slavery in her attempt to make the region a better place. She has upset the region and armies have been launched against her. To win the hand of the Dragon Queen, Quentyn must go on a grand adventure just like the ones from the songs and stories. But as Quentyn would soon find out, adventure stinks. 5 men accompanied Quentyn on his quest: Sir Cletus Ironwood, Sir Archibald Ironwood, Sir Garrus Drinkwater, Sir William Wells, and a maester named Kedry. Losing companions on such an arduous journey is understandable, even expected, but this shows how very early in the mission things just aren't going right for Quentyn. The way a character's story ends has to align with everything that came before. If a character continuously fails over the course of the story, if nothing they have planned before has ever gone right, then you would expect the last plan they have would fail as well. To have it be otherwise would feel unearned, almost like a cheat. Sir Cletus Ironwood has a few last words to offer before succumbing to his wounds. Quote, Cletus had been Quentyn's dearest friend for half his life, a brother in all but blood. Give your bride a kiss for me, Cletus had whispered to him just before he died. End quote. Cletus could not know that Quentyn would die with no bride nor any lips to kiss her with. Quentyn's journey ends in death and defeat, which is most fitting as he and his companions faced nothing but death and defeat since the very start of their journey. Maester Kedry was a learned man, a maester of the Citadel. He would have been their best advisor, their voice of reason. Quote, as much as he mourned Will and Cletus, it was the maester's loss that Quentyn felt most keenly. Kedry had been fluent in the tongues of all the free cities, and even in the mongrel Giscari that men spoke along the shores of Slaver's Bay. Maester Kedry will accompany you, his father said the night they parted. Heed his counsel. He has devoted half his life to the study of the 9 free cities. Quentyn wondered if things might not have gone a deal easier if only he were here to guide them. End quote. Quentyn lost his mentor figure. Perhaps if Kedry had survived, he might have been able to talk Quentyn out of the plan that ultimately killed him. Speaking of the mentor-like figure means this is a good time to discuss the hero's journey. The hero's journey is a template of stories that involve a hero who goes on an adventure, is victorious in a decisive crisis, and comes home changed or transformed. It was popularized by Joseph Campbell in his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. There are many variations of the hero's journey. It's not necessary for us to explore them all. All that is needed to be known is that the primary goal of the journey is for the hero to acquire what is called the ultimate boon, the reward for all the risk taken. Quentyn went to Meereen in hopes of marrying Daenerys, but that would not come to be. Quentyn suffered a series of major setbacks on his grand adventure, and as a result, he arrived too late for Daenerys. He failed to achieve his ultimate boon. In light of this defeat, Quentyn came up with a new plan to bring fire and blood to Dorne. He decided he would steal one or both of Dany's dragons. One might argue the dragons were the most important part of Dorne's original plan, not the marriage pact. Firepower is what Dorne really needs to win a war. Since Quentyn didn't get Dany, he could still steal a dragon, and, well, a win is a win. Quote, his friends had lost sight of his true purpose here. The road leads through her, not to her. Daenerys is the means to the prize, not the prize itself. The dragon has 3 heads, she said to me. My marriage need not be the end of all your hopes, she said. I know why you are here, for fire and blood. End quote. I strongly disagree with this angle, and so do Quentyn's friends. Quote, I can trace my lineage back. Fuck your lineage, said Garrus. The dragons won't care about your blood, except maybe how it tastes. You cannot tame a dragon with a history lesson. They're monsters, not maesters. End quote. Quentyn is coping here, trying to salvage his lost mission. One variant of the Quentyn is alive theory is that not only did Quentyn survive, he also managed to tame one of the dragons. So according to the theory, Quentyn did acquire the ultimate boon, except Quentyn was sent on a very specific mission. Over the course of this mission, Quentyn, a knight, makes many questionable decisions. Often these decisions come at the expense of his honor. So it's not just that Quentyn fails to achieve the last goal of the hero's journey. Quentyn fails the entire thing. This begins in the chapter, The Merchant's Man, the first chapter when we meet Quentyn. As I've mentioned, Meereen is in turmoil. As a result, no one wants to sail there because of the lack of trade and war. The only ships that can guarantee safe passage are full of fighters, which gives one of Quentyn's companions a plan. Quote, do you have a better way? Quentyn asked him. I do. It's just now come to me. It has its risks, and it's not what you would call honorable, I grant you, but it will get you to your queen quicker than the demon road. Tell me, said Quentyn. End quote. Quentyn, a knight, decides to go with a plan that will besmirch his honor. This will be the first mistake that would lead to the tragedy. Quentyn, Sir Archibald, and Sir Garrus joined the Windblown, a sellsword company led by a man called the Tattered Prince. Tatters is the last of 5 founding members of the company. He is a soft-spoken man in his 60s. Despite his age, he still sits tall in his saddle. He has pouches under sad eyes as large as saddlebags and silver gray hair. Tatters has been described as elegant. Keep in mind his appearance for later when the Quentyn is alive theory takes a rather dramatic turn. Quentyn, or Frog as he is called at this point in the story, Arch and Garrus sail with the Windblown to Slaver's Bay. Part of their journey takes them to Astapor, where they take part in a battle against Cleon the Butcher King and his army of New Unsullied. Quote, Frog would be glad to put Astapor behind him. The Red City was the closest thing to hell he ever hoped to know. The Yunkai had sealed the broken gates to keep the dead and dying inside the city, but the sights he had seen riding down those red brick streets would haunt Quentyn Martell forever. A river choked with corpses, the priestess in her torn robes impaled upon a stake and attended by a cloud of glistening green flies. Dying men staggered through the streets, bloodied and befouled, children fighting over half-cooked puppies. The last free king of Astapor screaming naked in the pit as he was set upon by a score of starving dogs, and fires everywhere. He could close his eyes and see them still, flames whirling from brick pyramids larger than any castle he had ever seen, plumes of greasy smoke coiling upward like great black snakes. End quote. Daenerys and the slavers have made Astapor a living nightmare, and Quentyn is there to witness it. The shadow of death haunts Quentyn as he goes about his grand adventure, and because of his rash decision to join the Windblown, he must also take part in the massacre to come. Quote, it was only coming back that Frog got a good look at the faces beneath the spiked bronze caps and realized that most were no older than he. Green boys screaming for their mothers, he thought, but he killed them all the same. By the time he left the field, his sword was running red with blood, and his arm was so tired he could hardly lift it." End quote. Quentyn is by no means a bad person. I am not trying to paint him out to be a villain, but I don't think we are supposed to excuse his lies and participation in the butchery of Astapor. This casts his whole hero's journey in a different light. Sellsword companies may be wretched hives of scum and villainy, but swearing oaths to one is still important. Oaths and vows have great meaning in this series. Quentyn and his companions chose to get to Meereen by any means necessary, forsaking their integrity for convenience. When the Windblown finally make it to Meereen and they find a chance to abandon the company, they do, thereby becoming deserters and traitors. This causes their reputations and their cause to become even more tarnished. And if Quentyn expected Daenerys to embrace him upon meeting him for the first time, he would be sorely mistaken. After all the setbacks that occurred across their quest, Quentyn and company finally managed to gain audience with Queen Daenerys Targaryen. This is after even more deceptions and lies. Quentyn presents her with the marriage pact, but he learns, much to his dismay, that he has come too late. Daenerys has already pledged her hand to marry another. But Quentyn does not wish to return home a failure. Quote, "Crawl back to Sunspear defeated with my tail between my legs?" His father's disappointment would be more than Quentyn could bear, and the scorn of the Sand Snakes would be withering. Doran Martell had put the fate of Dorne into his hands, and he could not fail him, not whilst life remained. End quote. That last line there speaks volumes. This makes Sir Quentyn Martell similar to Sir Waymar Royce. Waymar was also sent on an adventure, his first beyond the Wall. Waymar also refuses to return from the adventure as a failure. Waymar also went looking for trouble, and Waymar found it. Quentyn should have gone home to deal with whatever awaited him, just like Waymar should have gone back to the Wall. Instead, Quentyn chose to replace the initial mission with a plan to steal one of the dragons, one of the Queen's own children. Again, we have Quentyn adopting a, by any means necessary, approach to solving his problems. Once again, his actions are less than noble. Now he has escalated to full-on treason. Successful or not, what he plans to do will damage the alliance between House Targaryen and House Martell. It will lead to the deaths of innocents, which his father Doran Martell would never approve of. Quentyn appeals to the sellsword captain, the Tattered Prince, for aid in his plan. Tatters is not happy with any of the Dornishmen after their desertion, but he is willing to go along with Prince Quentyn and his mad plan for a price. Pentos. For his participation, he wants a whole damn country. The Tattered Prince was chosen to be the Prince of Pentos many years ago, but fled the country instead. The Pentoshi praise their princes in times of peace and plenty, but when famine strikes or illnesses spread, they sacrifice them. Quentyn accepts the deal. He has become so lost to honor, he will turn over a city full of innocents to his sellsword captain just so he won't go back to Dorne, a failure. Quentyn has become desperate, and desperate people tend to do foolish and reckless things. Being foolish and reckless can get you killed. It was supposed to be a simple plan. Quentyn and his two companions, along with several of the Windblown, would disguise themselves as brazen beasts, a type of masked guard working for the Shave Pate, and sneak their way into the dragon pit. They would feed the dragons, and when they grew sluggish enough, they would chain one of both of them. The stolen dragon, or dragons, would then be transported by wagon to waiting ships. Once they reached the doors to the pit, however, things immediately fell apart. The waiting guards attacked Quentyn, Arch, and Garrus when they used the wrong password to enter the pit. The guards were then killed by Arch and Garrus, while Quentyn stood speechless. Quote, "You were told your scheme was madness. Have you forgotten?" said Pretty Maris. "Do what you came to do." The dragons, Prince Quentyn thought. Yes, we came for the dragons. He felt as though he might be sick. What am I doing here? Father, why? 4 men dead in as many heartbeats. And for what? Fire and blood, he whispered. Blood and fire. The blood was pooling at his feet, soaking into the brick floor. The fire was beyond the doors. End quote. As we've seen with Daenerys in the fighting pit, as well as with the dragon seeds during the dance, claiming a dragon is no easy thing. One must be brave, bold, and cunning. Throughout the course of his story, we've seen Quentyn be nothing but fearful, uncertain, and lack confidence. If we are to believe that Quentyn is about to become a dragon rider, then his character should be changing into someone much more formidable. Daenerys Targaryen begins A Game of Thrones as a fearful, furtive young girl. She ended the book as a woman grown, a queen. Quentyn has not undergone a similar transformation. Quote, "The green one, Rhaegal, the white, Viserion," he reminded himself. "Use their names, command them, speak to them calmly but sternly. Master them as Daenerys mastered Drogon in the pit." The girl had been alone, clad in wisps of silk, but fearless. "I must not be afraid. She did it, so can I." The main thing was to show no fear. Animals can smell fear, and dragons. What did he know of dragons? What does any man know of dragons? They have been gone from the world for more than a century. End quote. Once Quentyn's companions cut down the guards and entered the pit, it becomes ever more clear the plan is doomed. It should be noted, Quentyn did not take part in the fighting. The Dornish man was too stunned to speak, let alone fight. Daenerys showed no such hesitation. In the pit, the dragons were too wild. They were broken free from their chains, and they were agitated that none of the people entering the pit were their mother. Quentyn insisted on following through. Quote, "A hand seized Quentyn by the shoulder. The torch spun from his grip to bounce across the floor, then tumbled into the pit, still burning. He found himself face to face with a brass ape. Garrus, Quent, this will not work. They're too wild. Quentyn wrenched free from Garrus's grip. "Viserion," he called. "The white one is Viserion." For half a heartbeat, he was afraid he'd gotten it wrong. "Viserion," he called again, fumbling for the whip hanging from his belt. She cowed the black one with the whip. "I need to do the same." End quote. Quentyn wanted to emulate Daenerys and how she tamed Drogon in the fighting pit, but he was nowhere near as sure of himself as Daenerys was in that moment. Quote, "Drogon roared. The sound filled the pit. A furnace wind engulfed her. The dragon's long, scaled neck stretched towards her. When his mouth opened, she could see bits of broken bone and charred flesh between his black teeth. His eyes were molten. I am looking into hell, but I dare not look away. She had never been so certain of anything. If I run from him, he will burn me and devour me." End quote. Daenerys instinctively knew she had to stand up to Drogon. She had to challenge him. She had to force him into submission. She did so by beating him with a whip. Now there is much to be said about the mother of dragons who once said a dragon is no slave, using a whip to beat one of her children, forcing him to do her bidding. But for now, just know her actions inspired Quentyn to bring a whip into the pit and do the same. But his efforts paled in comparison to Dany's. Quote, "The dragon's head was larger than a horse's, and the neck stretched on and on, uncoiling like some great green serpent as the head rose, until those two glowing bronze eyes were staring down at him." Green, the prince thought. His scales are green. "Regal," he said, his voice caught in his throat, and what came out was a broken croak. Frog, he thought. I am turning into frog again. End quote. Rather than transforming into a brave, bold prince, Quentyn is reverted back to a frog, the nickname given to him at the start of his story to hide his true identity. Let's continue with comparing Dany taming Drogon to Quentyn attempting to tame Viserion. Quote, "Dany hit him. No," she screamed, swinging the lash with all the strength she had in her. The dragon jerked his head back. "No," she screamed again. "No!" The barbs raked across his snout. Drogon rose, his wings covering her in shadow. Dany swung the lash at his scaled belly, back and forth until her arm began to ache. His long, serpentine neck bent like an archer's bow. With a hiss, he spat black fire down at her. Dany darted underneath the flames, swinging the whip and shouting, "No, no, no! Get down!" His answering roar was full of fear and fury, full of pain. His wings beat once, twice, and folded. The dragon gave one last hiss and stretched out flat upon his belly. Black blood was flowing from the wound where the spear had pierced him, smoking where it dripped onto the scorched sands. End quote. Daenerys knew exactly what needed to be done. She faced the fire head on. Quentyn was less adept. Quote, "Viserion," he called. "The white one is Viserion." For half a heartbeat, he was afraid he'd gotten it wrong. "Viserion," he called again, fumbling for the whip hanging from his belt. She cowed the black one with the whip. "I need to do the same." The dragon knew his name. His head turned, and his gaze lingered on the Dornish prince for 3 long heartbeats. Pale fires burned behind the shining black daggers of his teeth. His eyes were lakes of molten gold, and smoke rose from his nostrils. "Down," Quentyn said. Then he coughed, and coughed again. The air was thick with smoke, and the sulfur stench was choking. Viserion lost interest. End quote. Dany knows Drogon's name. He's one of her furious children, after all. Quentyn was uncertain which dragon was which, and that uncertainty can be heard in his voice. Viserion saw Quentyn for what he was, less of a threat, more of a nuisance, and completely disregarded him. And with the coughing, Quentyn was quite literally choking in the moment. The sellswords brought in carts of meat for the dragons to eat. This was to make them docile. Unfortunately, one of the sellswords was also armed with a crossbow. They fired at Viserion, wounding him. Daenerys' enemies have called for the deaths of her dragons, and the Windblown were initially hired by the slavers to fight against her. Perhaps the plan was to betray Quentyn and kill the dragons. Plots within plots, wheels within wheels. Viserion killed the sellsword, biting them about the neck and engulfing their head in flame. The intense heat caused their eyes to burst and their bronze mask to melt. Viserion then ate a portion of the body. Despite the carnage, Quentyn continued to try and tame Viserion, but there was another dragon in the pit that Quentyn had ignored. Quote, "Down," the prince commanded. "You must not let him smell your fear. Down, down, down." He brought the whip around and laid a lash across the dragon's face. Viserion hissed, and then a hot wind buffeted him, and he heard the sound of leathern wings, and the air was full of ash and cinders, and a monstrous roar went echoing off the scorched and blackened bricks, and he could hear his friends shouting wildly. Garrus was calling out his name over and over, and the big man was bellowing, "Behind you! Behind you! Behind you!" Quentyn turned and threw his left arm across his face to shield his eyes from the furnace wind. "Rhaegal," he reminded himself. "The green one is Rhaegal." When he raised his whip, he saw that the lash was burning. His hand as well. All of him was burning. "Oh," he thought. Then he began to scream. End quote. The chapter ends with Quentyn covered in burns to 100% of his body. Quentyn is alive at the end of the chapter, but the reader isn't given much hope he might survive. It reads very much like a death scene. Looking back to the first line of the first chapter of Quentyn's story, it seems quite clear that his story was being set up for a negative ending. Quentyn's death is shocking in the moment, but in retrospect, there is no more appropriate ending. George R.R. Martin was not at all subtle with what he had intended to do with Quentyn's story, to make it a tragic adventure. Adventure is the name of the ship Quentyn and his companions consider sailing on, but as they approach it, they notice it smells terrible. The adventure literally stinks. Quentyn first thinks the smell is because of pigs on board, but then he changes his mind. He marks the smell as piss, rotting meat, and night soil. Night soil is an older way of saying human excrement. Quentyn also says the smell is from weeping sores, wounds gone bad, and the reek of corpse flesh. The smell is death. Adventure is death. Failed adventure. That is what runs throughout Quentyn's chapters. Again, Martin makes it very clear that's the whole point. Here's a quote from a conversation between Quentyn and Garrus about all the friends they've lost along the way. Quote, "They're dead," said Garrus. "They won't care." "All dead," Quentyn agreed. "For what?" "To bring me here, so I might wed the Dragon Queen." A grand adventure, Cletus called it. Demon roads and stormy seas, and at the end of it, the most beautiful woman in the world. A tale to tell our grandchildren. But Cletus will never father a child unless he left a bastard in the belly of the tavern wench he liked. Will never have his wedding. Their deaths should have some meaning. Garrus pointed to where a corpse slumped against a brick wall, attended by a cloud of glistening green flies. Did his death have any meaning? End quote. Adventures, stories, heroes. Martin mentions them often in Quentyn's chapters because he's a hero on a failed adventure. Quote, "This is my duty, my destiny. You are supposed to be my friend, Garrus. Why must you mock my hopes? I have doubts enough without your throwing oil on the fire of my fear. This will be my grand adventure. Men die on grand adventures." He was not wrong. That was in the stories too. The hero sets out with his friends and companions, faces dangers, comes home triumphant. Only some of his companions don't return at all. The hero never dies though. I must be the hero. All I need is courage. Would you have Dorne remember me as a failure? Dorne is not like to remember any of us for long. End quote. The prince was on a doomed journey, and Martin lined his path with neon flashing lights. Yet there are readers out there that believe Quentyn Martell is not dead. Somehow, Quentyn will return. I would not doubt it if there were already comments from those that insist on Quentyn's survival, saying things like, "Burnt bones prove nothing." Even though the text tells us Quentyn was not a pile of burnt bones. Quentyn was not dead when his body was found. Quentyn was very much alive and capable of speaking for himself. If the burned man in Dany's bed is not Quentyn, that means he has not said a word that would give away his true identity. That is difficult to believe, to say the least. No doubt Missandei has called the man Quentyn. Surely he would have exerted some effort into correcting her if she was wrong. Not Quentyn are two words that would mean everything if the man was indeed not Quentyn. Even if a name wasn't shared, you would have to think something was said that might give Missandei reason to consider the dying man was not Quentyn. 3 days is just too long of a time for there to not have been something to arouse suspicion. If it were 3 hours, maybe that would have been more understandable. The phrase "burnt bones proves nothing," taken out of context, makes sense on its own. A pile of burnt bones cannot be used to identify a person. DNA tests don't exist as of yet in this world of ice and fire. Bones in general are no signifier of anything, as Jaime Lannister acknowledges when speaking to his Aunt Jenna about her son's remains. Quote, "His bones should be interred beneath the rock in the Hall of Heroes," Lady Jenna declared. "Where was his body laid to rest?" "Nowhere. The bloody mummers stripped his corpse and left his flesh to feast the carrion crows." "Beside a stream," he lied. "When the war is done, I will find the place and send him home." Bones were bones. These days, nothing was easier to come by. End quote. But as I've explained several times now, Quentyn wasn't a pile of bones. He was a living, breathing man, mortally wounded, but still here. Now, within the context of the story, burnt bones prove nothing has a much more significant meaning. The phrase is spoken by Daenerys in response to the rising number of cattle her dragons are accused of devouring. Every day, shepherds show up at court with burnt bones, asking the queen to pay for them. Daenerys begins to doubt the veracity of many of these claims. Some of the shepherds might be killing the animals and burning the bodies in order to get free money. Daenerys continues to tell herself burned bones prove nothing after being told that Drogon may have killed and devoured a young girl. Quote, "Her name had been Hosea. She was 4 years old, unless her father lied. He might have lied. No one has seen the dragon but him. His proof was burnt bones, but burned bones proved nothing. He might have killed the little girl himself and burned her afterward. He would not have been the first father to dispose of an unwanted girl child," the Shave Pate claimed. "The Sons of the Harpy might have done it and made it look like dragons' work to make the city hate me." Dany wanted to believe that. But if that was so, why had Hosea's father waited until the audience hall was almost empty to come forward? If his purpose had been to inflame the Meereenese against her, he would have told his tale when the hall was full of ears to hear. End quote. This phrase is Daenerys in denial about something she knows deep down actually happened. If Daenerys was confident that burned bones proved nothing, she wouldn't have locked her dragons away. So when a person repeats this phrase to counter the idea Quentyn is dead, they are only copying Daenerys and her denial of a cold, hard truth. It's not a statement of confidence. It's not evidence against anything. One other bit of text used as evidence for the Quentyn is alive theory is that the body in Dany's bed is said to be smiling. Something we learned early in Quentyn's story is that smiles never came easy to him. That means it's very difficult to get Quentyn to smile. So if Quentyn is not known for smiling, then how come he's smiling on his deathbed? Surely this must be an indication that something is amiss. This can be explained away as a stretch in logic and a stretch of skin. Take Tywin Lannister, for example. Jaime and his Aunt Jenna discussed the conditions of Tywin's corpse. Quote, "Is it true that Tywin was smiling on his bier? He was rotting on his bier. It made his mouth twist. Was that all it was?" End quote. Yes, Aunt Jenna, that's all it was. The same thing happened to Quentyn. Still, one might argue this series has featured many false deaths. Quentyn could be another to add to the list. Daenerys Targaryen walked into Khal Drogo's funeral pyre and lived. The Miller's sons were young boys that were butchered and burned, and their bodies presented as those of Bran and Rickon Stark to fool the people of Winterfell. Rattleshirt was given a glamour and burned in the place of Mance Rayder. Even Sir Davos has his own shocking fake death in Feast. How can someone still doubt Quentyn's survival when fake-out deaths appear to be a trend in the series? Well, Quentyn's death doesn't compare to any of those moments. For one, readers were never meant to think Daenerys was going to die when she walked into Khal Drogo's pyre. Quote, "My queen," Ser Jorah said, going to one knee. "Let Khal Drogo go. Please, Khaleesi, I know what you intend. Do not. Do not." "I must," Dany told him. She touched his face, fondly, sadly. "You do not understand." "I understand that you loved him," Ser Jorah said in a voice thick with despair. "I loved my lady wife once, yet I did not die with her. You are my queen, my sword is yours, but do not ask me to stand aside as you climb onto Drogo's pyre. I will not watch you burn." "Is that what you fear?" Dany kissed him lightly on his broad forehead. End quote. Dany committing herself to the flames was one moment her story built up to. From the very first chapter, where it's described that Dany likes hot baths and Targaryens have fire in their blood, Martin lays the groundwork for the funeral pyre scene. Daenerys and Quentyn are not the same. The Miller's sons were killed by Theon, just so. Their bodies were presented to the people of Winterfell as the bodies of Bran and Rickon. Theon didn't want it known the real Stark boys escaped, and so he had to do something desperate to cover up his own failure. The difference is the corpses of the Miller's sons were not burned beforehand. Theon recalls this when his sister Asha mocks him for his childish murders. Quote, "Well, I'm no great warrior like you, brother." She quaffed half a horn of ale and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I saw the heads above your gates. Tell me true, which one gave you the fiercest fight, the cripple or the babe?" Theon could feel the blood rushing to his face. He took no joy from those heads, no more than he had displaying the headless bodies of the children before the castle. Old Nan stood with her soft, toothless mouth opening and closing soundlessly, and Farland threw himself at Theon, snarling like one of his hounds. Erzin and Cadwell had to beat him senseless with the butts of their spears. How did it come to this? He remembered thinking as he stood over the fly-speckled bodies. Only Maester Luwin had the stomach to come near. Stone-faced, the small gray man had begged leave to sew the boys' heads back onto their shoulders so they might be laid in the crypts below with the other Stark dead. No, Theon had told him, not the crypts. But why, my lord? Surely they cannot harm you now. It is where they belong. All the bones of the Starks. I said no. He needed the heads for the wall, but he had burned the headless bodies that very day in all their finery. Afterward, he had knelt amongst the bones and ashes to retrieve a slag of melted silver and cracked jet, all that remained of the wolf's head brooch that had once been Bran's. He had it still. I treated Bran and Rickon generously, he told his sister. They brought their fate on themselves. End quote. The Starks treated Theon generously as well, and you can say he brought his fate on himself, but that's a deep dive for another day. Note that the bodies of the Miller's sons were dressed to make them look like highborns. If the burned man is not Quentyn, nothing was done to decorate his corpse to aid in the deception. When the heads of the children are placed on the walls of Winterfell, Theon makes sure to have them gruesomely modified to better hide their true identities. Quote, "On their iron spikes atop the gatehouse, the heads awaited. Theon gazed at them silently while the wind tugged on his cloak with small, ghostly hands. The Miller's boys had been of an age with Bran and Rickon, alike in size and coloring, and once Reek had flayed the skin from their faces and dipped their heads in tar, it was easy to see familiar features in those misshapen lumps of rotting flesh. People were such fools. If we'd said they were ram's heads, they would have seen horns." End quote. Burned bones proves nothing does not apply here because the bodies of the Miller's sons were not yet burned at the time of the deception. They were headless but otherwise left intact. In fact, because they were not burned beforehand, Maester Luwin is able to tell that they are not the bodies of Bran and Rickon. Quote, "New?" said Bran uncertainly. "The legs, I could tell. The clothes fit, but the muscles in his legs. Poor lad." He coughed, and blood came up from inside him. End quote. And so you see, it's not just enough to present a burnt body for another unless the features are drastically changed first, and even then a keen eye can spot the truth. If you think the headless bodies of the children were burned first and then presented to the people of Winterfell, then you are confusing the show with the books. Now for the case of Sir Davos and his quote-unquote execution in the Merman's court. When Davos is released from prison, days after his scheduled execution was set to take place, he is taken to meet with Wyman Manderly in private. They discuss Davos's fake death. Quote, Davos shifted uncomfortably. It was a queer feeling being dead. If it please my lord, who died in my place? Does it matter? You have a common face, Lord Davos. I hope my saying so does not offend you. The man had your coloring, a nose of the same shape, 2 ears that were not dissimilar, a long beard that could be trimmed and shaped like yours. You can be sure we tarred him well, and the onion shoved between his teeth served to twist the features. Sir Bartimus saw that the fingers of his left hand were shortened, the same as yours. The man was a criminal, if that gives you any solace. His dying may accomplish more good than anything he ever did whilst living. End quote. This deception obviously has taken a lot of time, care, and consideration. Great effort was put into making sure the dead criminal looked like Davos. Archibald and Garrus simply didn't have the same amount of time to carry out a similar fake. Pointing at some random burned body and saying, "That's Quentyn," would not be sufficient. And now for the Rattleshirt and Mance swap. This comparison is easy to dismiss because Rattleshirt often and loudly denied he was Mance Rayder before he was burned. Quote, inside his cage, Mance Rayder clawed at the noose about his neck with bound hands and screamed incoherently of treachery and witchery, denying his kingship, denying his people, denying his name, denying all that he had ever been. He shrieked for mercy and cursed the Red Woman and began to laugh hysterically. End quote. If we're going to compare events, the dead man in Dany's bed can talk, and if he's not Quentyn, then he should be telling Missandei, Barristan, or anyone listening that he is not Quentyn. Daenerys preparing Drogo and herself for the funeral pyre took time. The Miller's sons being killed, flayed, and dressed as Bran and Rickon took time as well. The same goes for Davos, Rattleshirt, and Mance. Arch and Garrus had little to no time to accomplish a body swap. They didn't have the proper tools necessary either. These comparisons just don't work. One of the major reasons why there is doubt Quentyn died is because his eyes didn't burst and melt due to the fire. If Quentyn was hit by dragon fire, then why didn't his eyes burst and melt as we've seen in similar cases? In Astapor, for example, quote, the black dragon spread his wings and roared. A lance of swirling dark flame took Krasny's full in the face. His eyes melted and ran down his cheeks, and the oil in his hair and beard burst so fiercely into fire that for an instant the slaver wore a burning crown twice as tall as his head. The sudden stench of charred meat overwhelmed even his perfume, and his wail seemed to drown all other sound. End quote. It also happens to the crossbowmen in the dragon pit. Quentyn's eyes should have melted then, right? No, not necessarily. For one, we know that Quentyn covered his eyes when Rhaegal hit him with fire. If his eyes were covered, they would be better protected from melting. Besides, dragonfire doesn't always cause eyes to melt. The sellsword Daario Naharis presents Daenerys with the heads of his former co-captains when she marches on Yunkai. The dragons breathe fire into the faces of those heads, but the text never tells us the eyes burst and melt. Quote, Daario upended the sack, and the heads of Salar the Bald and Prindal na Gazine spilled upon her carpets. My gifts to the Dragon Queen. Viserion sniffed the blood leaking from Prindal's neck and let loose a gout of flame that took the dead man full in the face, blackening and blistering his bloodless cheeks. Drogon and Rhaegal stirred at the smell of roasted meat. End quote. The eyes of Krasny's Monoclus burst because Drogon blasted him full in the face with dragonfire, and also because that's what Martin wanted to happen. In my research, eyes can burst and melt under extreme heat. In real life, that is. In fiction, it's up to the writer how they want to describe the burning nature of bodies. Some people believe Quentyn not feeling the fire immediately is also a sign something is wrong with the scene, but this is a real phenomenon called delayed pain. people can experience severe injuries but not feel the pain until much later. There are stories of people who have been viciously stabbed or shot or even missing limbs from accidents or animal attacks, and they don't even realize the missing limb is gone until they see it. Even then, the pain might not register. This is all due to adrenaline, the fight or flight response. You might have even experienced it as well on some level. Maybe you cut yourself and didn't notice until much later. This is actually mentioned in the series by Sir Barristan. Quote, "A thin red slash marked the eastern horizon where the sun might soon appear. It reminded Selmy of the first blood welling from a wound. Often, even with a deep cut, the blood came before the pain." End quote. Quentyn's death is also meant to include a touch of dark humor. The confused "oh" before he begins screaming is a surefire sign of Martin adding a bit of levity to the tragedy. Now I want to visit another sci-fi fantasy horror story to better prove my point. The movie Reign of Fire opens with a young boy named Quinn visiting his mother's job at a construction site. The workers have uncovered something under the earth that is unusual. Quinn rides an elevator deep into the site to explore. In an unknown cave, Quinn encounters a dragon. The dragon spits a caustic fluid in his face, causing Quinn to run. Quinn finds his mother, who takes him to a medical station to flush his eyes. They try to escape the cavern by elevator, but the dragon attacks, causing the deaths of everyone but Quinn. Let's look at the details of the scene. The dragon Quinn finds begins drooling flaming liquid before spitting in his face. If the spit is so hot, shouldn't Quinn be blind? Or worse, dead? How could a simple eye flush save him? Isn't that mostly water? Well, it's because it's a fictional story. The dragon spits at Quinn and Quinn keeps his eyes because that's the story. The dragon then goes on to burn everyone else it encounters. It spared Quinn a similar fate because Quinn is the protagonist. He grows up to be Christian Bale, the star of the movie. That's just how the story goes. Trying to make scientific sense out of the scene is futile. Reign of Fire is not a completely bad movie. I recommend it if you're into post-apocalyptic sci-fi action movies. Matthew McConaughey is also in it, and there's a part where he does something that's very badass, but also very dumb, just like Quentyn Martell. But back to the point. The scene from the movie does bring up something very important: medical attention. If Quentyn did survive the dragon pit, he would need medical attention. He was completely covered in dragon fire. But if we're supposed to believe Quentyn is alive, who is the burned man in Dany's bed? One theory is that he is the Tattered Prince. The burned man utters some words, and one of those words may be Prince. Missandei and Barristan think the burned man means Prince, as in Prince of Dorne, but he really means the Tattered Prince. The major issue here is that the Tattered Prince looks nothing like Quentyn. I've described him earlier in this video. Tatters is an older man in his 60s with silver gray hair. He is a battle-hardened warrior and elegant. Quentyn is younger, short-legged and stocky, thickly built with brown hair. His forehead was too high, his jaw too square, and his nose too broad. It would take a lot of dragonfire to make the Tattered Prince into the shape of Quentyn. That theory just does not work. But some theories take this idea even further. Not only has the Tattered Prince taken Quentyn's place in Dany's bed, Quentyn has taken the Tattered Prince's place as leader of the Windblown. Supporters of this idea use a line from the book that says the Tattered Prince has an unassuming face, and when he removes his cloak, he can look like anyone. This is a complete misinterpretation of the text. What the text says about Tatter's appearance comes from Tatters himself. He says, quote, "My ragged raiment," the Pentoshi gave a shrug. "A poor thing, yet those tatters fill my foes with fear, and on the battlefield the sight of my rags blowing in the wind emboldens my men more than any banner. And if I want to move unseen, I need only slip it off to become plain and unremarkable." End quote. All this means is that there is nothing about his appearance that is striking. He is not like Daario Naharis, for example. Daario has blue hair, a blue beard, and gold teeth. The Tattered Prince is just an older Pentoshi man. His cloak is his most defining feature, not his face. If you knew him only from rumors and reports, but you met him while he was not wearing his cloak, you would never know it was him. This is just like when Jon Snow is brought into Mance Rayder's tent and is unable to tell which person in the tent is actually Mance Rayder. He only knows him from rumors and scary hearth tales, so that makes it impossible for him to be sure which occupant is Mance. The only thing that identifies Mance is his black cloak with the little red stitch on it. Without his cloak and hidden amongst people that don't know him, Mance is able to pretend to be a singer. He's done this in the past at Winterfell, and he's doing it now. Obviously, if you met Mance before, you would know what he looks like now. You would be able to recognize him with or without his cloak with the scarlet thread. Just like Quentyn is able to recognize the Tattered Prince without his cloak because he's met him before. Quote, "The Tattered Prince himself was seated at the table, nursing a cup of wine. In the yellow candlelight, his silver-gray hair seemed almost golden, though the pouches underneath his eyes were etched as large as saddlebags. He wore a brown wool traveler's cloak with silvery chainmail glimmering underneath. Did that betoken treachery or simple prudence? An old sellsword is a cautious sellsword." Quentyn approached his table. "My lord, you look different without your cloak." End quote. Even in his brown wool cloak, Quentyn can clearly see that the man at the table is the Tattered Prince. I find this version of the theory a bit frustrating, to be honest. The theory makes it seem like the multicolored cloak has magical properties to it. A random person cannot put on the cloak and become the Tattered Prince. The cloak doesn't cover the Tattered Prince's face. People know what Tatters looks like, the members of the Windblown, for example, so Quentyn could not possibly take his place. If Quentyn foolishly tried to impersonate the Tattered Prince, he would have to fully commit to the role. This sort of deception is something the Faceless Men have to train years to learn how to do. Quentyn wouldn't know how to command the Windblown. He doesn't know enough about the Tattered Prince or the company to be effective in the role. Quentyn is from Dorne and would reasonably have a Dornish drawl. Even if he doesn't, are we supposed to believe Quentyn has somehow learned to speak exactly like the Tattered Prince? That he knows exactly how to act like him? And as I have already covered, all the other Windblown would have to do is look at Quentyn and see he is not Tatters. He's just some guy with a 5-head wearing his cloak. For this to work, Quentyn would have to cover his face and his hands so only his eyes are visible. He would have to disguise his voice like the mummer Tyrion sent to Riverrun to free Jaime. He would have to suddenly be confident and commanding so the Windblown wouldn't be suspicious. He would have to have intimate knowledge of the Sellsword Company, each individual, and of the Tattered Prince. All of this while suffering burns and keeping a pet dragon at bay. It's simply impossible. One last thing about the body swap plan. We have to assume that Arch and Garrus were quick-witted enough to come up with the lie that the burned body before them was Quentyn. Was Quentyn in on the plan? This would mean he would have to be in control of the dragon so that he would have the time to stop and talk to Arch and Garrus. Not even Daenerys had that great amount of control over Drogon. If not, the plan is all down to Arch and Garrus while Quentyn flies off, which means Quentyn isn't aware of it, which means at any moment Quentyn could come down on a dragon and blow his own cover. Regardless, I have one final question. Why choose the body of the burned man that's obviously still alive? Why not choose the body of the crossbowman, the one that tried to kill Viserion and failed? Quote, "The crossbowman was fumbling for another quarrel as the dragon's teeth closed around his neck. The man wore the mask of a brazen beast, the fearsome likeness of a tiger. As he dropped his weapon to try and pry apart Viserion's jaws, flame gouted from the tiger's mouth. The man's eyes burst with soft popping sounds, and the brass around them began to run. The dragon tore off a hunk of flesh, most of the sellsword's neck, then gulped it down as the burning corpse collapsed to the floor. End quote. The crossbow man's face and body were sufficiently burned. The melted brass would better conceal his features if anyone dared to look closer. It would be easier to lie and say his corpse was Quentyn, because there's always a chance the burned man who's still alive might recover and then he might start talking. It makes no sense that they would choose the body of a living man over the body of a dead one if they intended to make the swap. After failure after failure, we have to ask, has Quentyn earned the right to mount a dragon? The answer is no. Quentyn has not successfully completed the hero's journey. Therefore, it only makes sense if his story ends in one final failure. The Spurned Suitor is not a dragon rider. The Iron Suitor, however, might do what Quentyn could not. Victarion Greyjoy is also on his way to Meereen. In fact, in the Winds of Winter sample chapters, the Ironborn have finally landed in Meereen and are joining in the Battle of Fire outside the city's walls. Victarion Greyjoy is in possession of Dragonbinder, a sorceress horn from Old Valyria, which may give him the ability to claim a dragon as his own. It is Victarion who has successfully completed many steps in the hero's journey. He was given the call to adventure by his brother Euron. Euron tasked Victarion with going to Meereen and bringing back Daenerys Targaryen to be his bride. Victarion initially refused the call, but then decided to accept the quest as a way of betraying Euron. Aeron Greyjoy, the Damphair, is a mentor-like figure. Moqorro is a mentor as well, and he offers Victarion supernatural aid. The Dusky Woman can be viewed as the Temptress. Victarion suffers a kind of death and descent into the underworld after the wound he suffered on the shields festers and plagues him. Moqorro heals him, and Victarion is resurrected and reborn. Victarion has a plan for how he will capture the dragons. Moqorro is assisting him. Victarion has the tenacity to accomplish it. Victarion is the successful version of the man Quentyn was trying to be. Victarion has a better chance at being victorious and may claim one of the dragons. I think my biggest problem about the Quentyn conspiracy is that there is no plan ahead for his supposed survival. The theory stops with Quentyn being alive and that's it. There are some vague ideas of him impersonating the Tattered Prince, but it all feels half-baked. With other theories, there is a clear path ahead for how things are expected to go. Take the theory that the Hound is the Gravedigger. Readers were led to believe that Arya left the Hound to die of wounds he suffered in a fight in a storm of swords. But in A Feast for Crows, it is heavily implied the Hound is now living on the Quiet Isle, which is a monastery of sorts. Because the Brothers of the Quiet Isle are members of the faith, there are theories that the Hound will be called upon to face his brother, the Mountain, now called Robert Strong, as part of Cersei's trial. There is a lot of excitement for this potential battle. At least I think that's the right word for it. There is a lot of speculation on how it might happen. There is none of that for the Quentyn is alive theory. Quentyn promised the Tattered Prince Pentos. There should be speculation on how that will play out. If Quentyn is pretending to be the Tattered Prince and is a dragon rider, will he lead them on a conquest of Pentos? Or will the Windblown hold him to that promise? If Quentyn is not masquerading as Tatters, what next for him? Does he free his friends, help in the Battle of Fire, try to find Daenerys? In a sample chapter from Winds, Viserion and Rhaegal are spotted flying above the fighting outside Meereen's walls. Viserion has no rider and is not focused on the fighting, but on feeding. There are corpses being flung into the city and the dragons are eating them up. The Windblown are also there fighting. So where is the theory for where Quentyn is during all of this? Where is Quentyn is something Doran Martell is desperate to know. As of Arianne's most recent sample chapter from the Winds of Winter, Doran has had no word of Quentyn or his companions. No news if they were successful in winning over Daenerys and her dragons. The only dragon Doran hears of is Jon Connington and his so-called prince named Aegon. One might think this news would bring joy to Doran Martell, but all it gives Doran is doubts. Quote, "Fire and blood was what John Connington, if indeed it was him, was offering as well. Or was it? He comes with sellswords, but no dragons," Prince Doran had told her the night the Raven came. "The Golden Company is the best and largest of the free companies, but 10,000 mercenaries cannot hope to win the 7 kingdoms. Ilya's son, I would weep for joy if some part of my sister had survived, but what proof do we have this is Aegon?" His voice broke when he said that. "Where are the dragons?" he asked. "Where is Daenerys?" And Arianne knew that he was really saying, "Where is my son?" End quote. When the letter bringing word that Oberyn Martell had died arrived, Doran Martell sat with it for hours, watching the children play in the water gardens. It was almost as if he could sense what dreadful news it contained. And now, with no word of his son's whereabouts, it's almost as if Doran knows what happened. Something has gone wrong. Something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. And his son will not be coming home. Just like his brother. Just like his uncle. Just like his sister. Quentyn is dead. Arianne also wonders what is happening in Meereen. She thinks about Quentyn, the marriage pact, and more. Quote, "The secret pact that Prince Doran had made all those years called for Arianne to be wed to Prince Viserys. It had all come undone on the Dothraki Sea when he was murdered, crowned with a pot of molten gold. He was killed by a Dothraki Khal," said Arianne, "the Dragon Queen's own husband." "So I've heard. What of it? Just, why did Daenerys let it happen? Viserys was her brother, all that remained of her own blood. The Dothraki are a savage folk. Who can know why they kill? Perhaps Viserys wiped his arse with the wrong hand." Perhaps, thought Arianne, or perhaps Daenerys realized once her brother was crowned and wed to me, she would be doomed to spend the rest of her life sleeping in a tent and smelling like a horse. "She is the Mad King's daughter," the princess said. "How do we know?" End quote. If Arianne has such misgivings about Daenerys because of the death of Viserys, what will Arianne think about her when she learns about the death of her own brother? Quentyn's death will have a huge impact on what's to come for Daenerys, for Arianne, and for so many more. Quentyn will not have to live with the nuclear fallout of his actions, but the rest of the world will. Arianne didn't grow up with Quentyn. She doesn't know him well, and now she never will. This will play on her guilt for all of the terrible things she thought of him and her own father. Likely, she will place all of her guilt, her sadness, and anger on Daenerys. The Quentyn is alive theory doesn't account for what we already see is happening in the Winds of Winter. It doesn't fit with the story Martin has already written. And here's my final point on the matter. Hiding Quentyn's survival is incredibly pointless. If Quentyn succeeded in stealing the dragon, there's nothing Sir Barristan, Daenerys, or anyone can do about it. A writer's bond with their dragon lasts for their lifetime. Viserion, or Rhaegal for that matter, would belong to him. It's not as if Sir Barristan would have gone looking for Quentyn when he learned of the truth. He and his men haven't even gone looking after Daenerys, and she is their queen. The harshest punishment Quentyn could have expected is imprisonment. He's a highborn, the son of the Prince of Dorne. There is nothing for him to hide for. Archibald and Garrus are the ones that should be hiding. They can be punished with a much sterner sentence. Imprisonment would be the best thing for Quentyn actually. His would be a gentle prison. After those burns, a nice room to rest and recover in, medical attention, and the knowledge that he is the second dragon rider in recent history would be just what Quentyn Martell needed if he had survived. But he did not survive. Quentyn Martell is dead. For a lot of you, this was a very long video covering something obvious. Quentyn is dead. He is dead, he is dead, he is dead. For the rest of you, those who believe Quentyn is still alive, this video has either convinced you that he is actually dead, or, what is more likely, your opinion has not changed. In fact, this video might have deepened your belief Quentyn still lives. For me personally, I am 100% sure Quentyn is dead. If Winds ever comes out, there will be a prologue as Martin has promised, and then our familiar POV chapters. The story will play out and Quentyn will never make an appearance. But here's what I think will happen. The Quentyn is alive theory won't die, it will simply change. Believers will say Quentyn is still alive, but now he's run away. Arch and Garrus lied so Quentyn could run off and live a life free of the responsibilities of being a prince. Believers may even use Laenor Velaryon's survival on House of the Dragon to support this new version of the theory. And so the conspiracy will live on, even though Quentyn himself does not. Because it was not about Quentyn. It was never about Quentyn.
He put Bran into bed, covered him with blankets, and blew out the candle. For a time, Robb sat beside him in the dark. Bran wanted to talk to him, but he did not know what to say. "We'll find a horse for you. I promise," Robb whispered at last. "Are they ever coming back?" Bran asked him. "Yes," Robb said, with such hope in his voice that Bran knew he was hearing his brother, and not just Robb the Lord. "Mother will be home soon. Maybe we can ride out to meet her when she comes. Wouldn't that surprise her to see you a horse?" Even in the dark room, Bran could feel his brother smile. "And afterwards, we'll ride north to see the war. We won't even tell Jon we're coming. We'll just be there one day. You and me. It will be an adventure." "An adventure," Bran repeated wistfully. He heard his brother sob. The room was so dark he could not see the tears on Robb's face. So he reached out and found his hand, their fingers twined together.